Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan are with me, as always, on Thursdays as we get you set for the next Penn State kickoff. That will occur at 3:30 in Beaver Stadium on Saturday afternoon. The Northwestern Wildcats coming to town with a record of 3-2. The Nittany Lions await them with a record of 3-2. Certainly not the circumstances we expected to encounter 2025 homecoming. Pressure is clearly on James Franklin and this Penn State squad to bounce back after back-to-back losses in the Big Ten. A shocking defeat on the road last Saturday that we covered in detail after that loss against UCLA. If you missed our last episode, we spent some time breaking down the Northwestern Wildcats, their path to this point, players to watch, strengths, weaknesses, and ultimately a forecast for this game from a man who covers Northwestern. That was Gavin Dorsey. So if you missed that, drop on Wednesday, go check that one out. A lot more about the Northwestern Wildcats, what they're going to bring to town. We also had Tyler Calvaruso last episode discussing Penn State recruiting when it comes to quarterbacks and ultimately what it comes to them dealing with on-field struggles and how that could impact things with a 26 and 27 class. A lot of conversation to get to over there if you missed it. But now we're focusing on what comes next. And Mark and Daniel, we've got a matchup between two Big Ten squads trying to avoid the 500 record in mid-October. We didn't think we'd be having that kind of dialogue regarding the Nittany Lions right now. But as it has been the case on recent podcast episodes, Mark, it feels like we've kind of got to begin with a psychological check on these Nittany Lions.
Yeah, Daniel and I were both out there in Pasadena, and after the game, everybody seemed to say all the right things. At least I thought so, player-wise. And throughout this week, it seems that the players are saying the right things and handling themselves the right way. But are we really going to know until they get onto the field? We thought the same thing last week. That they were handling things well. Immediately after the game, maybe not. I mean, Drew Aller obviously was very emotional after the Oregon game. But throughout the week, they seem to be handling themselves well. So all signs point to them not being emotionally broken. But I don't think we're going to really have an understanding of that or know for sure until we see them out on the field.
Oh, sorry, mute there. Daniel, you were up just like we all were with the players yesterday. We were on calls throughout the week. I thought that Drew Aller in particular on Wednesday really was about as positive, as loose as we've heard from him in some time. And that probably includes coming off of some of those wins in the non-conference schedule. He laughed when I brought up some of his rushing success of late. Seemed to be in a good place mentally. What do you think ultimately you picked up this week, whether it was those calls on Zoom early with some team leaders or when we got face-to-face with guys on the practice field Wednesday evening?
I think you saw things progress a little bit throughout the week. I thought that on Monday you had a little bit of a stoic James Franklin still working his way through that loss Saturday. I thought Tuesday, Drew Shelton and Zachy Wheatley were – I think the tone of those calls were pretty serious. I thought that, it was a lot of, kind of why is this happening, trying to figure that out. And that's always a tough question, to ask and answer. But then I thought by the time we got to Wednesday, I thought Drew Aller was pretty loose. And then on Wednesday evening, I thought, Franklin was in a little bit of a better mood. I thought that, the players that we talked to seemed to be in a good place. I talked to Aldavian Collins, who's a little bit more of a low-key guy, but, he started laughing at different things and, was, I thought, pretty open about different topics. So, yeah, I think that you just saw a team that, had to process things a little bit. I know that you talk about the 24-hour rule and you move on from things pretty quickly. I think there is an element, though, that sometimes these things take time. We've talked about it. I think you had the stat, Tyler, 46 games since they last lost back-to-back games. That was my first year on the beat back in 21. So it's been a while. This is new territory for a lot of these guys, especially younger guys who most of these guys played at really good high school programs. So there's not a lot of experience with losing, I think. And so everyone has to handle it differently. And I think by the time we got to Wednesday, it felt like some of that processing had happened.
You had spoken to a guy you described as low-key in cornerback, Aldavian Collins. There's nothing low-key about Andrew Rappleyea, the third-year tight end who I got a chance to chat with after practice. He's going to be a straight shooter. We had him on the podcast in high school. He has been the same guy when we've gotten to chat with him here in Happy Valley. And he was pretty candid about where the intensity needs to be this Saturday. He felt like all last week leading up to the UCLA game, he thought there was certainly a mission. Everyone was bought in. We need to win this game, the importance of it. Go beat UCLA. Don't focus on the 0-4 record, focus on the team. But he said when it came down to it and they got on the field in the Rose Bowl, they were sleepy. They didn't have the juice that they required, and the game started to get away from them. All of a sudden, they're down 20 points at halftime, and there you are in desperation mode again. He did indicate that it's been high intensity, especially this practice coming off the field that we had him Wednesday. He thinks the D squad has brought a different level of intensity this week, and he thinks just across the field right now, guys are bringing a bit more. We'll see if that shows up in Beaver Stadium because, Mark, as we heard from Drew Aller this week, there's a sense that these guys are playing for James Franklin. They're always playing for him. He's their head coach, but in a different way now with the national, local scrutiny on the 12th year Nittany Lions leader. Guys like Drew Aller and some of his teammates this week indicated that they want to get this done in part to alleviate some of that for him.
Yeah, it's amazing that they all say they don't really pay attention to what anybody's writing or saying on social media. But I guess it is a little different when you're in a 110,000 seat stadium and, 80% of the people in there are booing. So I guess you do get that. But I thought it was interesting, Daniel. I don't know if you were there at the time when Drew Aller spoke right after the game. But one of the first things he said was there's no coaching staff he'd rather be with. I mean, he's very cognizant, and he actually he proactively said that after the Oregon game as well. Even when he was, still, you could see his eyes were red and he was still very emotional. So he's obviously one of your key team leaders. And if he's getting that message out there, and that was a common theme after the game, I think everybody kind of understands the heat that is on, whether he deserves the heat or not, that's up to each individual to decide. I mean, James Franklin, I think it's amazing where he's got the program from where it was, to a consistent top 10 type program, albeit not this week. But, I think overall we think they're a pretty good team, but still, in very fair criticism, unable to get over that hump. So until they do it, I guess he's kind of left with the players having to kind of defend him. But I do think I go back to what I said earlier, Tyler and Daniel. They're saying all the right things. I mean, they are saying all the right things, but how is that going to manifest itself out on the field? And how is it going to manifest itself when, they go through introductions? And I think we all have a pretty good feel for what's going to happen during player and coach introductions this week, don't we? I mean, I'm not positive, but I know that I will be recording when the head coach is announced just to see what the fan reaction is.
Yeah, I think there's going to be Fire Franklin chants before kickoff. If I was a betting man and you had to ask me yes or no, I would say yes. And I think that's just where, there's plenty of people who are going to come to homecoming because they want to see their old friends. They want to enjoy the pageantry of college football, do some tailgating, spend a couple nights back in town, reminisce a bit, and get in the game. And the game is kind of just a part of that experience. But a lot of people are going to be getting in their cars and saying, I need to be there because I need to yell and I need them to know how I feel. And so that's how it's going to be. And if they were to go down in this game, start slow on either side of the ball, yeah, they're going to be exposed to a hostile home environment, which is strange to say in Beaver Stadium, but that's the reality. And Daniel, the other
Tyler,
reality,
can I make one point?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
Sure.
After that UCLA game, I mean, if you look at Brenningham, there were people who made their way to the tunnel in Los Angeles just to point and yell at Franklin. I can't say that I understand that, but I mean, I will, and I've mentioned this before, as we record this, the Phillies and Eagles are both playing later today, and I will surely have expletives coming out of my mouth at some point. But I don't know that I would ever proactively go to a tunnel where players or coaches are. And it's not like, people had to walk probably a pretty good distance to get there to be screaming at them. And if you look at a few of the faces on that Brenningham, if you stop it, there's like rage in people's faces. I don't know that I quite understand that, but it's not whether we understand it. It's there with some people.
Yeah, there's been some rage on our message board this week too. If you had noticed, there's rage across the Penn State community right now, and Penn State's got to walk across the fire to get to the other side right now. They can't really sidestep this moment. And Daniel, to me, whereas last week we were like, we want to see them bounce back, have a get right game, win by 30 against UCLA. Now it's simply they need to avoid a third loss, because you look what's ahead. It's a night game at Kinnick on the following Saturday. Then you've got a bye week. Then you go to Columbus. Then you play Indiana, who's ranked inside the top 10 right now. And it becomes a very slippery slope if you can't stop the bleeding this Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you move from, winning comfortably as your goal to just winning, at least from our perspective on the outside. I think that this is a really, I guess the entire thing now is a key stretch, for Penn State. Like, it's no longer all right, you lose to Oregon, now you can ramp back up for Ohio State. Now it's just, if you want to have any hope of being in that postseason conversation, much less actually being in it, it's everything has to go right from here on out. And, that starts with Northwestern. And I think I made the comment to you guys, like, we heard 1-0 this week, probably more than we did the, August and September combined. I think that there's been a little bit of a reset with that approach. But, I mean, I would be hypocritical if I, said that they should have been doing this all along, because I think I said in August and maybe at some point in September that, I thought that it was reasonable for them to lay things out there, put it out there, not necessarily take that, as explicit of a 1-0 approach, because, like, we all know what the game is. Like, the players all know what the game is. We all know where things stood coming into the season. But I do think that this week has felt like a little bit more of a, back to basics for Penn State and their, public approach to the game. We'll see what that yields. I know that Northwestern can be stubborn at times as an opponent, but it does feel like that, they know what's at stake, but they also know that it doesn't matter what happens against Ohio State or Indiana or whatever if they don't get things done, against Northwestern.
Let's sort through some takeaways from our time with James Franklin after practice on Wednesday. One of the more notable things that's come up this week, and certainly was glaring against UCLA, is the lack of trust that Penn State staff currently has in its linebacker group beyond proven veterans. Before, it was a three-man show, Tony Rojas and Amari Campbell as the starters, and then Don DeLuca essentially as the primary backup at both spots. Rojas goes down midweek last week, and you lose one of your top defensive players, a guy who was trending in a very good direction. And it was not a group effort to replace him. It was all but one snap, really, for Don DeLuca. Him and Amari Campbell, both around 80 snaps against UCLA. According to Pro Football Focus, and we always say take it with a grain of salt, but according to their analysis, 3 missed tackles for DeLuca, the lowest PFF score among any defensive player who was out there for 10 snaps or more. He did set a career high with 12 snaps, but there were some lowlights along the way. And I think Don DeLuca is fantastic as the guy that we saw last year. Someone who maybe makes some spot starts. I think he had 4 or 5 starts in 2024, a supplemental defensive piece, a leader in the locker room, and a special teams ace. And to ask him to play 80 snaps, that's a tough challenge. And clearly it blew up in their face a bit with the way the game went, not just for DeLuca, but the resistance to put in anyone else. Mark, someone on the board had asked me, about the Alex Tash and Cam Smith comparison and why was Smith in, and this board poster made a point. I think it was a good one. The staff maybe saw him as being more athletic and a better fit for going up against a quarterback like Nico. My response to that was, well, we'll never know, and neither will the staff, because they didn't take a look at what that might be. Cam Smith got involved for 1 snap when Don DeLuca was briefly injured, and then it was DeLuca the rest of the way. Keon Wiley is the only other linebacker beyond those 2 starters who was involved for multiple snaps. He was out there for 5 of them against UCLA. James Franklin has been asked this a couple times this week, Mark, about the linebackers, the young guys, whether it's Alex Tash, Cam Smith, Anthony Specca. Why aren't they involved? What do they need to do? And he keeps coming back to the complexity of this defense. And Jim Knowles has run out of options, whether it's to simplify this thing or to just stick with 2 guys or to feel uncomfortable about playing a 3rd or 4th guy. He's told us for a while he's had trust issues with this linebacker group. Jim Knowles told us as recently as the bye week that he had trust issues with the linebacker depth. But it has to rip off the Band-Aid right now, right? You have to get some of these guys involved, have to see how they respond to game action. Maybe there's some mistakes and missteps along the way. Maybe a guy goes and makes a play in the backfield, forces a fumble, does something that makes him feel confident, and all of a sudden you got a light in his eyes that wasn't there before, because guess what? You grow up in games. You take your lumps in practice, but I think you grow up in games.
Yeah, just one correction. You mentioned DeLuca 12 snaps. You meant 12
I'm sorry, 12 tackles, a career high. He played, almost 80 snaps, as I said. And thank you
You
for
had
correcting
mentioned
me.
the snaps, but I just wanted to make sure that people, because that 12 snaps, well, that's like nothing. But I think this problem began in the non-con, right? When they weren't getting some of those younger guys, maybe the snaps. Tyler, you have a better memory on the snap counts than I do, but I remember looking at those every week and saying, man, it just doesn't seem like these young guys are getting really as many snaps as you would hope. I mean, we identified this as an issue in the preseason. I forget which one of us. I know we were here arguing. I forget who, and I honestly, I'm not remembering it. One was saying the linebacker depth was an issue. One was saying defensive end. And I think we see which one.
I think I was right. I don't remember which one it was, but I think I was right.
It's irrelevant. I mean, if you are right, it would not be the first time that you were right when you and I were talking about something. But my point being, I think we found out which one. We got an answer for it, I guess, is my point. The other thing is, I mean, you have Jim Knowles, who has been coaching for 40 years. I mean, is it incumbent on the guy who's been coaching in college football for nearly 40 years to adjust, or is it incumbent on the true freshman and redshirt freshman to adjust? I mean, I just, you're in the position that you're in, and I tried to ask Franklin about that yesterday. Is it a matter of, he's saying that guys aren't playing with enough confidence or speed within the system? So at what point does we're 5 games in, 6 weeks in, including the bye, at what point is it less about trying to teach the guys the system and more about making the system absorbable for younger players who you absolutely need? And I want to follow up something. I said it earlier this week, and I'm going to repeat it again. You feel terrible criticizing Dom DeLuca because he has been nothing but outstanding for this program, a great leader, a tremendous story. My criticism isn't of Dom, it's of the coaching staff for putting him in a position where he's not able to succeed and not recruiting well enough to have people ready. People, as we're recording this on Thursday, go check out our site. Brian Doan did a really nice piece on linebacker recruiting and kind of how we got here and where things are going and is there hope for the future. But it's I think, very telling. So, yeah, I know I went off a little bit on a tangent there, but to me, I don't think this needs to be nearly as complicated as it is. I think it's incumbent at this point on the coaching staff to make the adjustments that their players are going to be able to play within the system.
Yeah, this was, I think you were looking at Anthony Specca and Keon Wiley getting like 10, 15 snaps in some of those non-con games. Once they got into Big Ten play, it has been nothing. Alex Tash got like 20 snaps against Villanova. He hasn't played since. I think Specca has fewer than 5 combined snaps in a couple Big Ten matchups. And obviously they did not get Cam Smith involved at all through the first 4 games. It seems to be something that was kind of more prioritized once Tony Rojas suffered his injury. But segueing over to receiver, it's a similar situation where we thought we'd get through the non-conference, Daniel, and not only would you get 3 blowout wins and a 3-0 record, but you'd get a really good exploration of your depth chart. You'd have a firm sense of maybe who in that background, which second and third stringers need to stay tucked away, which of them are ready for prime time to maybe contribute against an Oregon, contribute on the road against UCLA throughout Big Ten play. And yet we didn't really get to see that linebacker, and certainly not wide receiver. In 2 matchups against Florida International and Villanova, where Penn State ultimately outscored those opponents 86-6, you had Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard, the 2 young wide receivers that this team has seemingly been very high on, and at least everything you hear publicly and a lot of stuff we heard during preseason camp, very high on these 2 and their potential. They combined for 6 total snaps in those games, and they have not been involved since those games. So 4 game span now, Daniel, we're talking about, where those 2 guys have 6 combined snaps. You got to go back to Nevada for the last time they had some legitimate run. And James Franklin did not like my question to close out yesterday's scrum. I thought he was really great with a lot of the questions yesterday. I thought his body language was way better. His energy was way better than last Wednesday. We discussed that a bit last week on the podcast. But he kind of bristled when I brought up the fact that, is it difficult for this staff to fully evaluate these young receivers, specifically Denmark and Howard, because we're not talking about guys playing scout team. They are guys that have been publicly stated as second team wide receivers by James Franklin. They're on the 2 deep. They are primary backups. They have not, is it difficult to get a full evaluation without game reps? And James Franklin went on to say, these drives, these snaps, these plays are golden. They can't just throw anybody in there. He used the context of throwing somebody in there. And I feel like he reacted as though I were asking about Lyric Samuel and Matt Outen. He went in front of us at the podium before the season started and gave us the 2 deep at wide receiver and said, Tysier Denmark is the direct backup to Trevor Pena in the slot. And then you've got Kobe Howard as the direct backup to Kyron Hudson outside. And this is not even a conversation about those 3. And I know there's been some film going around and conversation about where the effort might be for some of them and where they are in terms of productivity and playmakers to this point in their Penn State career. It's not even about them. It's about the fact that this is an offense that could use a couple more playmakers. And from what we've heard, Tysier Denmark and Kobe Howard could maybe fit that bill. James Franklin sounded very reluctant about these 2 being involved in the game plan moving forward. What did you make of that? Because I was in the moment and I was kind of the one asking the question. So I went home and I thought about it a little bit more and kind of discussed it a bit on the message board. But what did you make of James Franklin's reaction to that question and ultimately where things stand at wide receiver outside of those 3 transfer players and then 5th-year senior Liam Clifford, who's getting 5 to 10 snaps a game?
I mean, I think there's a couple things at play here. I think you go back to them just basically having to play the starters a full game against FIU. I think that looms as a pretty big missed opportunity, I think, to bank some of the reps out there. But then also I just kind of think about historically over the past couple of years that, no matter who they've talked up, no matter what they've said going into the year about, we think we have this many guys that can contribute, like it only ends up being, 4, maybe 3.5, 4. Maybe 4.5, you get to that point. And so for me, I mean, I think that there's an element where part of me is surprised that you haven't seen Denmark out there, that you haven't seen Kobe Howard out there. I mean, I think we were all a little surprised last year that we didn't see Tysier Denmark out there. But I think that in sort of the grand scheme of things, I guess I'm sort of not surprised that you get to the end of the game and only 3 or 4 wide receivers have played, really only 3. And then when you factor in the tight end usage too, this doesn't really seem that anomalous to me. I do think that in a way, it is an issue if, the whole thing is, can they be more explosive? Can you get big plays? Where can this come from? Can one of these guys give you juice? And this is also this is a little bit different than the RB3 thing. I've heard people say well, why can't we see one of the other running backs out there? Maybe they can give him juice. I mean, they're really on the record about those 3rd running backs that they have not seen what they needed to see. We haven't quite gotten that publicly with these wide receivers. And so, I just think that
Daniel, what have we gotten publicly on these wide receivers? I mean, we got Marcus Hagan spending 5 minutes telling us how awesome Kobe Howard is during preseason camp, how he's the competitive mindset, the physical guy. I mean, I had a story up in our preseason progress report series where it was a lot of quotes and commentary from within the building about how he was in his playbook, how he was super smooth coming from Chaminade Madonna, how he, again, had a different competitive edge that maybe was lacking from this receiver room. And whenever Tysier Denmark comes up, James Franklin goes out of his way to talk about how he's ready for his moment when it comes. He's going to take it. He's going to be prepared. They've seen it. He referenced practice and what they're seeing on the practice field determining who gets involved. I wasn't suggesting they supplant any of those starting players or tell the transfers to take a seat. But again, you don't quite know, I think, based on my time around football, you don't quite know sometimes until a guy goes out there, has a chance to do it in a game against another team. And when he has some success, it can take off. I mean, you can see an 18-year-old go from a boy to a true college football player real fast when he gets a chance to kind of develop that momentum. And so for me, that's where the disconnect is. And oh, by the way, Kobe Howard led all receivers in touchdowns during preseason camp and is a guy that we just heard we didn't hear about any freshman receivers in the last few classes the way we heard about Kobe Howard. Hell, a few years ago, we didn't hear close to the kind of sentiment about Malik McClain or Dante Cephas that we heard about Kobe Howard throughout August and throughout spring ball. So to me, it's interesting to be here, the second week of October and James Franklin pointing to practice results and kind of getting defensive about it when everything that we've been fed publicly or off the record about these guys has been quite glowing and would lead you to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would warrant 5, 10, 15 snaps to see what they can accomplish in a college football setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things that stand out to me is that I think coming out of the UCLA game, like one of the reasons why I just like can't really get worked up about this is that coming out of the UCLA game, like passing game to me did not feel like the problem. Like I thought
Daniel,
that
it was a little ugly downfield with some of the receivers trying to get. I mean, I think Drew Aller came in that game. We feel better about Drew Aller than we did before that game, but I don't know. I feel like that way about the passing game as a total. I probably disagree with you there. I think there's it, and I'm not saying you need to thrust one of those guys into the moment on a fourth down play or a fourth quarter play. But I think the fact that they don't know what they have through non-conference into now, and they seem hesitant to look, leads you to believe that they're just going to stick with what they have. And I don't think what they have has been good enough quite yet.
Yeah, that's fair. The other thing too that stands out to me is that, James Franklin he said that like, when it's their time to get called on, they'll be ready. And to me, that seems very, that's a dicey proposition when these guys haven't played. I do think that some of the things like I talked about that, similar to the past couple of years under James Franklin, you're only seeing, 3-4 wide receivers play no matter what they say. Something else that I've been thinking about too is that, every year during the non-conference slate, it's all right, like we're going to get all these guys experience, all these backups experience. And to me, it feels like the only season that really happened was 2022. I think back to that 2021 season where there was some questions about who was going to be the QB2 behind Sean Clifford, and that how important that non-conference slate was going to be to get guys reps. And then you basically lose a non-conference game. Oh, they did have a legit non-con game against Auburn mixed in there, but that Villanova game was an opportunity to get reps. But because of that game flow, you couldn't get to that point. So you lost an opportunity to bank reps there. And then you got to the point at Kinnick Stadium where suddenly you needed to rely on one of those guys who was supposed to get seasoning during the non-conference slate, and they weren't ready. And so I think that is, to me, it's not necessarily like, you're leaving, some explosiveness on the table. Like you're leaving, that Kobe Howard or Tyseer Denmark could, do something to lift this offense. Like, yeah, that's a possibility. I'm high on both those guys. I liked what I've seen in the limited looks. But to me, it's more the fact of like, you could end up in a situation where you really need one of those guys where, you don't need them to, be the best wide receiver on the field. You don't need them to, be this huge playmaker. You just need them to be out there and do their job and do their role. And how do you necessarily know if they're going to be ready for that? So to me, like, I think that there's a lot of the concern that's been going around, about this has to do with the ceiling of the offense and, what is going on there. But to me, I think potentially a bigger issue going down the road could be what happens to the floor if you need to turn to one of these guys if you're put in that sort of situation. So I think that, in terms of trend lines and things that we've seen, especially over the past 5 years, I have a much more limited sample size with James Franklin than the two of you, but these are some things that I think that we've seen repeated. And I know that losing a wide receiver is a little bit different than losing your quarterback in a situation, but that's something that's been in the back of my head, as we've been having these discussions.
Last night, Daniel asked starting quarterback Davian Collins if any young receivers have been standing out in practice. He said Kobe Howard, and the quote there
I was fishing for something on like a Jeff Exner, a Lyric Samuel, like someone like I asked him specifically like scout team, like, who's just a young guy that you've been going against in practice that has impressed you. And, I was, maybe we'll get something else on somebody else, but back to Kobe Howard again.
Yeah. And then King Mack was asked about Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard specifically. He said they're talented. And when I say talent, I mean very, very talented. They're doing the right things. They perform every day. They do what they're told. It's a matter of time when that opportunity comes and then taking advantage of that opportunity. He did mention, King Mack did, that he believes the coaches are doing what they feel is right. And when it's time to showcase, those guys will be ready to showcase. But he finished with, quote, but as far as preparation and the ability to make plays, they definitely have that ability 100%. We've had a lot of good feedback on those guys, just haven't seen it in-game action to this point. So we'll see if anything changes there. We know for many of you listening and watching and maybe saying, what the heck, 4th and 5th wide receivers have not been at the top of the list, but it's a topic of conversation right now. And I think it's worth noting just generally about how this staff is approaching personnel decisions, because did that help contribute toward getting to 3-2? Does it contribute toward struggles down the road? We don't quite know yet, but ultimately a lot of personnel stuff to wrap your head around that hasn't made always the most sense. And Mark, I just think it's worth noting with this, Penn State doesn't hang out like a $2 million check to 5-star freshmen and say, hey, here's $2 million just to show up on campus and let us have the privilege to work with you, because we live in the NIL world. They pay these guys plenty. They're taking care of as freshmen. But the thing here at Penn State, the carrot at the end of the stick, is that they will proactively compensate you, give you that pay raise if you prove to be a valuable piece of the locker room, a valuable piece, more importantly, of on-field play, contributing toward wins. They will come to you before you need to knock on their door about taking care of you with an NIL situation. And we do live in a world where players can pursue pay raises at this point. And so I think it's a situation where it's natural to wonder, not only are you going down with the eligibility clock, tick, 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 but your financial ceiling as a college football player, which is in such a remarkable place right now, it gets lower and lower and lower each game that you spend on the sideline, each time you don't get to accrue game film. And I just wonder if that's part of the human nature here. And when you have to manage things in the locker room, not just at wide receiver and linebacker, but also at running back. You know, the next guy has 6 carries. There's been a hesitancy to go beyond the starting lineup. As Daniel laid out, the non-con didn't maybe flow the way you hoped it would, where you were up 45-0 in the third quarter every game. But Mark, do you think, and this is new school for all of us, but you've covered a lot of old school football. So when you get to this point and we're having a conversation like this, I mean, players got to play to get that pay raise. And when you're not playing, I wonder where it puts you mentally.
Yeah, first of all, you're a troublemaker this week. You're causing all sorts of trouble with everybody all week, in a good way, good trouble. Anybody who's been watching James Franklin, he has aired consistently over and over and over and over and over on what's the old coaching saying? I'd rather play somebody a few games too late than one snap too early.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit of trouble with that anymore because, number one, of what you're saying, I mean, there are financial implications involved, but we've also seen him on the other side go to extremes to give veteran players every single benefit of the doubt and then some when they're struggling on the field in games. We're not talking about practice. You know, we're not talking about, you know, what he's seeing from practice film. And you know exactly what I'm pointing at here. I mean, you have a running back, one who's averaging 3.8 yards per carry and one who's averaging 7 yards per carry. I mean, we're through 5 games, 2 Big Ten games. So I have trouble understanding how these young guys have to prove themselves in practice, but you have people who aren't necessarily proving themselves on the field in actual games. So I just think there has to be a little bit more leeway on probably both sides of that. And the other thing that he said about Howard, Tyler, and Daniel is that he wasn't, I'm not quoting here, I'm paraphrasing, but it had to do with what he wasn't doing on special teams. And I was reading that to mean he wasn't blocking. I don't know if he wasn't tackling. I don't know. I mean, but it wasn't clearly him like returning kicks, because
this is back in August, not last night.
Right.
Yeah, this is back in August.
I'm sorry, yeah. But I mean, that's what he was kind of hanging his hat on for why the kid isn't playing. And you get this far into the season and your receivers aren't quite what I think people expected them to be. At what point does the kid not have to prove himself on special teams to give him a look that he may be able to help you? And you're right. It isn't just us saying this. King Mac said it to me. Squirrel Davian Collins said it to Daniel. Coaches have said it. So I just don't, I kind of scratch my head when you look at both sides of that.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. When you lose a game like the way they lost at UCLA, you open yourself to all kind of scrutiny. You open it up for us to kind of parse through the personnel plan. We're not discussing probably the depth here. We're not discussing some of these things if you can avoid the calamity that took place in Pasadena, but you become exposed to this kind of conversation with every loss, with every poor performance. I don't think we really let them off the hook through some of those non-conference performances either with our coverage here. And so let's turn the page a little bit.
Let's see what accountability looks like, Tyler. Let's see. I mean, that's what James Franklin said. So he said that it's on him to hold everybody accountable. He didn't tell us why, and I understand that. There's no reason to tell us ahead of time, and that would only tip off your opponent. But let's see on Saturday what accountability looks like, whether that's running back snaps, whether that's who's playing at linebacker, whether that's who's playing at wide receiver. What is the face of accountability for this program after 2 losses?
Yeah, and I just want to know one more thing from James Franklin. He sounds like you can expect to see more of some movement on the right side. TJ Shanahan was the starter at right guard last week after Anthony Donko was listed as questionable in pregame. Donko, though, ended up resurfacing in the lineup at right tackle, took some possessions from Nolan Rucci in the second half. I don't think it's a secret that Rucci has struggled to duplicate his postseason performance from last year thus far in this regular season. And I asked James Franklin about that. It wasn't exactly the most clear answer, but it does sound like they are going to keep working Donko maybe at both positions. We're going to see more of Shanahan. I thought Shanahan played pretty well against UCLA. And Daniel noted to us that he saw not just Donko at the guard spot as the first right guard up at practice, but also working off of some tight ends on more perimeter blocking like a tackle would. So we'll figure that out. By the way, Daniel has a full offensive notebook up from Wednesday's look at practice. I got one on defense. Mark has 3 minutes of video highlights, and Grace Brennan has a photo gallery up at the site along with takeaways and full video of James Franklin's press conference. Guys, when we look ahead to this game, I can't help but wonder if maybe the Drew Aller we saw late against Oregon, I think the Drew Aller we saw out in Pasadena, is that the version we're getting moving forward? Because I talked about the desire to see him be a thermostat. He was that guy at UCLA. He was kind of, after that long run on 3rd and 9 where he runs 25, 27 yards, whatever it was, key moment, he kind of yelled out loud. He was charging up his team. I think he was trying to generate some juice for the offense. Daniel, what do you expect from Drew Aller going into this matchup? And what would it mean for the team if he has found himself mentally, if he has gained that edge or regained it perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be really significant for Penn State going into 3 of the tougher games remaining on the schedule. If you tack Indiana onto the Ohio State back-to-back. And that's what you're going to need to see. I mean, I think that we've been waiting to see things really, really click in for Aller. I think we've seen different stretches over the past couple of years where he's looked like the quarterback who was promised, or we've seen that leadership really emerge where he looks like that alpha QB1, the 5-star, number 1 recruit type of player. But if he can carry over what he did against UCLA, I mean, I think that would be really beneficial for Penn State. We sort of joked about it where, going after post game, like the attitude, the body language, everything was a lot better. Part of it was probably the fact that he played well. And this is, honestly, like the first loss at Penn State where he wasn't the topic of conversation.
Great point. That's a great point. Yeah.
Like outside of the Peach Bowl, maybe. But yeah, I mean, this was the first time where, we didn't come off the field and it was like, this is every single thing Drew Aller did wrong today. There was a lot of other stuff going on. And so I think that that's something that has contributed to his mindset a little bit too. We know how competitive he is, but it helps when that you're doing your part, and I think it takes a little bit of a weight off of you. I think if he can carry that into Saturday's game, Penn State will be in a really good position, and we'll see if some guys make plays for him. I think that that's something that can make him look a lot better and this offense look a lot better too.
Mark, anything else to add on number 15? And I'm going to put it on a tee for you. We got to get to the Singleton-Allen conversation one more time because it feels like put up or shut up time right now for James Franklin's staff. He talked about it in hindsight this week when I asked him that, yes, going into the UCLA matchup, there was focus on getting Kaytron Allen more touches. Clearly that didn't happen. He talked about it again on Wednesday after the practice. There's been conversations with players. There's been conversations with staff. They're aware that they need to get more touches to Kaytron Allen, who, again, is averaging 7 yards per carry. Say what you will about the offensive line. They have not lived up to expectations, but Kaytron has found a way to get 7 yards per carry one way or another. Nick Singleton about 40% of his snaps in the last 4 games, actually, I think it was, 40% of them are going for 3 yards or less. And so you're not really setting up down and distance opportunities for yourself. Mark, if you have anything on Aller, that's great. I know you got some things to say at running back.
Yeah, on Aller, again, I just thought he handled himself really well, going back to what Daniel said after the game. And I think that's important for your leader, for the guy who's out there. I mean, if they went into that game that the idea was to get Katron the ball more, and then you have 4th and 2, the biggest play of the game, and he's not even on the field, and he wasn't even on the field for that series, there's a disconnect there. There's a level of communication that is not happening, and that to me is troubling. I mean, if the game plan, what happened in that game that would have led you to believe that Katron wouldn't have been a good option there? And I mean, not necessarily handing him the ball, but using him as a decoy, whatever you were going to do. I mean, the man has to be on the field, right? When a game is on the line, the man has to be on the field. So again, we're through 5 games, we're through 6 weeks. It's enough of a body of work that this guy's earned it. I mean, what else does he have to do? And when you talk about the offensive line, the way Katron runs lends itself to be successful with lines that aren't necessarily blowing open giant holes. I mean, one of the things for Singleton is that if you get him the edge, at least in the past, when you've been able to do that and he gets through, he's gone. But if you're asking me who's going to lead a 4-minute drive, a 4-minute drill, and grind out tough yards, I mean, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, that is Katron Allen. And I think everybody on the team is seeing this. One guy is being way more successful, and he should be getting the ball. And that's where, when I say accountability, we're going to see what accountability looks like. James Franklin was on record yesterday, and again, I'm paraphrasing. You guys are better at remember the exact words, but he said they have to get him the ball more, right? They have to get him more involved or more touches or whatever it was. And if that doesn't happen, it's an issue. I mean, it's an issue now. It's going to be an even bigger issue if you keep going on record as saying you need to get the guy the ball. And there's always an excuse, right? It's always, well, we didn't have as many snaps. I mean, remember, that was what was happening when they were looking, Daniel, going back to what you were saying, when they were looking at trying to get second-team QBs reps. Well, the way the game played out, there wasn't enough snaps. And, in the meantime, the starter's in there with, 30 seconds left in the game, and they're up by 3 touchdowns. So I think this is where the rubber meets the road. And people may not look at this game. You may say winning this game is important. I think winning this game convincingly is important, because if you don't win this game convincingly, all of those red flags are still there, all of them. And given what you're going into, I think that's a bad situation.
Penn State's a 22-point favorite. We'll give you our predictions in just a moment. Defensively, though, guys, I think it's been buried a bit in the conversation this week because there is so much to talk about. But boy, do they have a ton of proof. Jim Knowles on down. We had a lot of time with the linebacker conversation. But generally, Daniel, what do you need to see from this defense to make you feel better about where Penn State stands overall? And how much pressure is suddenly on Jim Knowles' lap right now? And James Franklin has talked about the complexity of his defense, maybe kind of challenging the development of some of the younger pieces on the defense. He was flat out saying that this is not as fast or aggressive a defense as they've had in years past. And I can't imagine that was the blueprint to reach October and be having this kind of commentary from the head coach after the move they made last winter.
Yeah, I mean, people can go back to what I said on Monday about this topic a little bit more in depth. I don't want to repeat those points, but I think that this was a concern. I think coming into the year from people who had followed schools that Jim Knowles had been at before. That was one of the talking points, was that you look at the year-over-year improvement from year 1 to year 3 of his systems, and those numbers were really good, but this was a kind of a 1-year season. This is a 1-year thing for Penn State right now, given the roster that they came in with, what the stated goals were. I do think that, I think one thing I want to see is that they don't get jumped on early. Like, what kind of answers do they have for that scripted drive that comes out? I do think that they really got on their heels against UCLA. UCLA was able to hit first. I think that young Jerry Neuheisel had a good game plan that he came out with against Penn State. So I think that first quarter will be pretty, I think, indicative of, how they're coming out, how they're playing, and, what we should see for the rest of the game. I think that, we talked about the personnel stuff a lot, but I think in terms of what I'm really looking for from that defense, it's just, I think a big thing is just going to be getting off the field on third down, getting off the field on fourth down. Oregon did a good job staying on the field. UCLA, I think, did an even better job of staying on the field. And so I think that against a team like Northwestern, which isn't exactly the most high-powered offense, isn't exactly the most high-flying team, the less opportunities that they have to stay on the field, grind things out, shorten the game a little bit, the more opportunities that your offense will have to put things out of reach.
Yeah. This Northwestern team, I think they're capable of marching. If Penn State allows them in the field, you could see 8, 9, 10 play drives. They're going to do a lot of dink and dunk. Preston Stone, I think, has a pretty solid quarterback to the intermediate level, 10, 20 yards down the field, but they found a running back this season. They have an above average to good offensive line. I think it's in the top half, maybe the top third of Big Ten play even thus far, maybe a couple NFL guys on that offensive line. So to me, they're the kind of offense that can stick around the field, and all of a sudden you end up with a lopsided time of possession, which has really plagued them so far in Big Ten play. Mark, Daniel, I think that we can now get over to the coaching staff just to finish this conversation, because we put, other than Jim Knowles here, we are on alert right now. When the question goes out to James Franklin on the Monday of the game week, are you considering staff changes? You know where we're kind of at right now with this team. Mark, how important is this game for the staff? We've talked about the players, the personnel. How important is it for a clean game plan, an effective game plan that gets executed before guys legitimately might be in jeopardy of getting called to the principal's office and maybe being handed the pink slip?
Yeah, I think it's critical. That Oregon game they played well in areas, but we saw zero improvement in a lot of the offense with a lot of the offensive issues, and that was coming out of a bye. So to me, that was a real trouble spot. And then defensively, no disrespect to Tony Rojas, but he's obviously a really, really good player, but should not having him had made the difference between holding Oregon to 17 points and allowing UCLA to score 28. So to me, that's less about X's and O's and less about personnel and more about effort. And, I would give them this. Maybe they were tired because they played a lot of snaps and you have that long trip. But yeah, I'm going to go back to what I said before. We're going to see what accountability is in these next couple of weeks. I know I'm saying it over and over again, but I don't want to let James Franklin off the hook, because he said that multiple times this week, but he didn't give us any indication other than maybe Catron needs to get the ball more of what accountability is going to look like. So yeah, I think if they struggle in this game, we're going to see, I think we'll see accountability in the form of what's happening with coaches. Does that mean somebody getting a pink slip? I don't know about that, but we've seen him make drastic changes, last year with Tom Allen, switching away from him being the guy in the headset. In hindsight, that was a pretty big deal. When you're saying the defensive coordinator, can't be heard. That it can't communicate effectively to your Mike linebacker, and you have to give it to a guy who's been in coaching, college coaching for a handful of years. So yeah, I think it's not just this week, guys, but these next couple of weeks. We went from thinking that this was a team that could lose one, maybe two games, to now. Is anybody looking at that Iowa trip as a gimme?
No.
Is Indiana coming in here, all of a sudden, what does that look like? And then, obviously, we know what the track record is against Ohio State. So, yeah, these are critical times for the program.
Let's talk players to watch, and let's get over to you, Daniel. Why don't you lead us off on this one?
Yeah, I think I want to see what we're going to get from the pass rush. Deni Dennis Sutton, Zariah Fisher. I'm going to get to it a little bit more in my bold prediction, but Preston Stone, after a rough start, has been playing a little bit cleaner recently, but those mistakes are in there. Like, those mistakes are on tape in terms of him turning the ball over. So I think if you can get Zariah Fisher, Deni Dennis Sutton, even Zane Durant, get moving, get upfield, speed him up a little bit, then maybe that secondary, which came into the year with a lot of hype, they can take advantage.
Mark, who's your Penn State player to watch versus Northwestern?
I'm going to be master of the obvious and go with Katron Allen. I think if he doesn't get 20-plus touches, it doesn't necessarily have to be 20 carries. I mean, we've seen last year some of what he could do as a pass catcher, but I think it's imperative for them to show everybody that they're willing to make a commitment to the guy who's playing better. And are you worried about him getting tired? I'm not, because we saw what he was able to do in the college football playoff last year. This guy is a workhorse back. You've taken it easy on him to this point. Your season is at the breaking point. You know, some would say it's beyond the breaking point. Now I think you have to get your best offensive player, and in my mind, he is your best offensive player, and that's why I usually don't go with the master of the obvious, but this time I think it's important.
I'm going to go to the trenches and spotlight Zane Durant here. He's got 1.5 tackles for loss through 5 games. I don't think that was any of our expectations about where he would be from a production standpoint this far into his senior year. He had 11 tackles for loss last year, was widely considered one of the premier defensive tackles in the nation, not just in the Big Ten coming in. So I think you'd like to see him maybe go and set the tone for this defense, wreak some havoc. I look back at the last time this team played Northwestern on the road out in Illinois a couple of years ago. It was kind of a breakout performance for then sophomore Zane Durant. 3 tackles for loss. He was everywhere that game. You guys remembered, you covered it. And so I think, can you get back to seeing a guy who creates chaos for you, does things for the teammates around him? I don't know why it hasn't happened thus far for Zane Durant. It's one of those questions that we have. You look across the board, there's not a lot of guys who are, have improved upon what they did in 2024 for whatever reason. And he kind of falls in that category. So keeping a closer eye on 28 in the trenches and see if Zane Durant can't take a step forward for himself and help the defense, take a step forward that it needs to after what happened last week. He is a guy who's very prideful. And I know anybody felt the pain from what happened against UCLA. It's going to be Zane Durant. Let's get into our predictions now. We'll give you our score predictions and our bold predictions for the matchup. Again, it's a 22-point betting spread based off what we're working with. And Mark, we'll begin with you.
I'm going to go with my bold prediction first. When I saw David Akers' kid as a punter for Northwestern, I had to involve that somehow. So I think young Akers can outkick his coverage as a punter on at least one kick, and Devontae Ross is going to return it for a touchdown. I want to see him getting more opportunities. The way the punting game works anymore, guys are really good at sky kicking and angle kicking, but this guy's averaging like nearly 47 yards a kick. So look for him to outkick his coverage and for Devontae to make his magic happen. In terms of the game, I'm going to really be looking at that linebacker position. You mentioned about how this is a really good rushing team, and just through covering football through the years, it seems to me that it's easier for linebackers to play as young players against rush-heavy teams. I think there's less thinking. It's more point and go, and I'm anxious to see if they give some of these younger guys more of an opportunity. Offensively, I've beaten it to death with Katron Allen. I wouldn't mind them. Everybody's talking about setting up the run with the pass. I still wouldn't mind seeing them do a little bit more, setting up the passing to set up the run. I know I'm repeating myself, but a lot of people are saying set up the pass with the run. I'm trying to go the other way. So anyway, I think Penn State is going to win comfortably. In all candor, Tyler made my score prediction for me because we do a TV show, and I want to be fair. I was going to go with something right in this area, and I'm going to stick with it. I was going to go with Penn State not quite covering, but winning relatively comfortably, 34-14.
Yeah, well, Mark was getting ready to take his flight or on his flight back from California. I was in a studio in Altoona with the great Neil Rudell and former Penn State captain Mike Irwin. So I selected on behalf of Mark. I think he's missed maybe 4 of those shows over the past 38 years or whatever it's been. So happy to get in the saddle for you for one Sunday. Daniel, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so I talked about Preston Stone earlier. I think he's going to be a central figure in this game. I got some quotes from him in Vegas at Big Ten Media Days that didn't quite get the chance to resurface this week because of circumstances. I don't really think anyone was in the mood to read what Preston Stone said out in Vegas. But, I asked him about being in the whiteout on the sideline, and he said it was really cold and we got our ass kicked. He was the backup for SMU. But he also said that, he said, giddy up, I can't wait. I think we have every chance to win that game. And hearing that in July, kind of like sure, whatever you say. I like the confidence. October feels a little bit different. And who knows what kind of confidence that Preston Stone could be bringing in here. I do think that Penn State will win. I think that maybe it'll follow a similar template to what we've seen the last two Northwestern games be, which was, really ugly early on, getting mucked up, not quite in the rain that we saw in 2022, but maybe a slower start out in like we saw in Evanston 2 years ago. I do think that Penn State will be able to pull away a little bit, and I think they'll win 24-10. Don't think it's going to be the prettiest game. Think that we're going to hear a little bit from the crowd in the first quarter, maybe second quarter, maybe in the halftime. But I think that a big way that Penn State wins this game, my bold prediction, they're going to intercept Preston Stone 3 times. Tyler, I listened to the your podcast with our Northwestern, the Northwestern writer, and he talked about that Preston Stone had cleaned things up a little bit. He had 4 interceptions against Tulane, 2 interceptions against Oregon. I think Penn State splits that difference, and as one of the better secondaries Northwestern's facing, and Audavian Collins takes one of those back for a pick 6 to help, put the Wildcats away.
Mark already gave my score because I gave it on TV on Sunday. And so I'm going to stick with what I said live on that show. 34-14, Penn State winning, which would mean all 3 of us have Penn State winning, but not covering. And if that happens, they would fall to 0-6 against the betting spread this season. As far as the game flow, I have some faith about where Drew Aller is. I feel better about where he is and kind of the blame that he warrants right now in the grand scheme of things. And so I think that if he can carry over that and be a steadfast guy for them, because they're going to need it. It's not an easy thing to go home and go on homecoming into Beaver Stadium and hear the kind of vitriol that they're going to hear in Beaver Stadium. So they need a guy like Drew Aller to help them keep the hand on the rudder and move forward and not fall apart psychologically. And again, I'm going to buy what I've heard, believe that we're going to see more Katron Allen this week. That's going to be a good thing. Ultimately, I think that it'll be 34-14, like I said, which means Northwestern, couple long possessions that make you a little scared about what might happen in this game. But ultimately, in my bold prediction, I think Penn State counterbalances some of those longer Wildcats possessions. Takeaways, like Daniel, I've got 3 turnovers forced. I don't know if they're going to be all interceptions, but 3 turnovers. James Franklin was on the record this week saying they need to generate some takeaways on defense. And I think they'll turn those takeaways into at least 13 points along the way. So that's what we've got for you prediction-wise and storyline-wise. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Mark, Daniel, and I will all be back inside Beaver Stadium early, well ahead of the kickoff on Saturday. We'll let you know what we're hearing from the crowd, what we're seeing on the field before this one kicks off, and we'll stay around after the game for our post-game coverage, talking to players, James Franklin, writing things up, and, of course, getting together with Daniel for a post-game podcast before we head home. On behalf of these guys, I encourage you to check out all of our coverage at Lions247.com. You mentioned earlier Brian Doan has a really interesting piece up about Penn State and the linebacker position right now, a national perspective from Brian, which is always great for us on the site. A lot more cooking over there leading up to kickoff. For now, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.